Clive N Wrench is a 3D platformer heavily inspired by classic games of the genre from the N64 and the original PlayStation, and has been a passion project some 10 years in the making by solo developer Rob Weiss. He has now seen his dream come to fruition, and the game recently released on the Nintendo Switch. But does Clive strive for perfection, or is it a bit of a wrench to play? Well, thank you to the publishing team for the review code, and now let's find out. So in terms of story, Clive and his monkey pal Wrench must stop the evil Dr. Dorcas, who has stolen the blueprints of talented engineer Professor Nancy Merricarp. To do this, they must chase Dr. Dorcas across time and space in their time-travelling fridge and put an end to his evil deeds, visiting a number of different time periods in the process. None of this is made overly clear by the opening cutscene, it must be said. However, if you do buy the game physically, as a nod to the games that inspired it, this is written in the manual that's included. Clive N Wrench is a 3D collectathon platformer and features a gameplay loop reminiscent of games from the N64 era, such as Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, or Rocket Robot on Wheels. You begin in a hub area which has tunnels leading to the game's 11 worlds, with you only starting with access to one of them plus a tutorial stage. When you enter a tunnel leading to a world, you'll be greeted with an area themed around that stage, giving you a chance to access the level or enter the boss level for this particular stage. When you enter the level, you are tasked with collecting 10 ancient stones, and these ancient stones are needed to enter the boss doors mentioned just now, with the door displaying the number of stones needed in order to be granted access. The gameplay loop itself is standard for the genre, and fans of old school N64 collectathons will feel right at home. You explore the stages, finding one of 10 main collectibles. Some will simply be hidden somewhere, others will require you to do a task for an NPC, and one is found by collecting 5 keys to unlock a safe, similar to Banjo's Jinjos or Mario's red coins. You have a checklist for each of the stones, and they all have a vague clue as to where you may find it within the level or what you might have to do. There are several recurring tasks that show themselves level to level. In the first stage, for example, a bee has lost its 5 children, and in the second there's a badger who has also lost their children. There is also a squirrel that runs around for you to catch with a stone as a reward, unless of course it freezes to the spot as it did in the second stage, and this is something we'll touch on later. This repetition of tasks isn't anything new in this style of game. Mario and Banjo were certainly guilty of repeating tasks across stages, but it is a shame to see it happen a bit more often than I would have liked. You will also have watches to collect. These are basically the game's coins or notes, and come in a variety of colours, and each colour has a different value attached to it. There are a number of enemies in the game themed around the time period of that level, each with different attacks, although dispatching them is fairly standard, with that satisfying attack you do by swinging your monkey pal around. The hit detection isn't always reliable though, and I ended up having to take a hit when I felt like that shouldn't have been the case on a few occasions. Your health is indicated by a carrot cake in the corner, and you gain health by finding slices, which I did feel were perhaps not as common as I would have liked, but thankfully you do have unlimited lives, and a death just sends you back to your last checkpoint in the level without any collection progress being lost. Once you have enough stones, you can enter the boss fight, which you need to defeat to access the next world. The bosses themselves are your standard affair for a 3D platformer, just work out their attack pattern and strike when the time is right. I did find them interesting to fight, and even the first one had a puzzle element to defeating it, but there are issues with these fights that will get mentioned more when we talk about visuals and performance. It's a shame that there is no real impact felt when you land a hit on them, which can lead to some confusion as to whether you are actually hurting them. Their health bar does of course display this, but when immersed in a battle, it would have been easier to see a visible cue of pain instead of having to avert your eyes from your opponent for clarification. In terms of controls, you use the left stick for movement and the right stick for the camera. B is jump, A is your attack, and Y is to hover when in the air. You can press R to crouch on the ground or ground pound if you are in the air, and for the most part these controls work well, although there are some aspects we found to be quite unintuitive at first. For example, pressing the Y button in the air to hover did feel quite awkward, and it would have been more comfortable to just be able to hold down the jump button once doing that initial jump. This would have freed up the Y button to be attack, as it did feel a bit awkward having to use A. You can remap some of these of course, but not one such as holding down a button. Once used to it though, movement through the worlds felt quite natural, and the moveset given to you, although nothing too in depth, did present you with a good deal of freedom. The jumping for instance felt very generous. Holding the R button to crouch before jumping gives you extra height, and if you combine this with the double jump and then hover, you should have no problem accessing a lot of the areas. You can also hold L to sprint, but the L button is also used for swimming, holding it down and using the stick to steer, and this was incredibly awkward, and the camera, although fully controllable still, did seem to feel the need to move into the least helpful places whilst in the water. Overall, the gameplay is exactly what you would expect from this genre of game, and the developer has succeeded in capturing that N64 style gameplay loop that you would have seen in those classics from the late 90s and early 2000s. It is pretty generic though, and it doesn't really build on what came before it, but it scores 14 out of 20. Once used to the layout issue mentioned and a few camera concerns, controls worked well, they get 15 out of 20. When it comes to the visuals, Clive N Wrench seems to lean more towards the PS2 era rather than the N64 games that inspired the gameplay, and we'll start off with a few positives. Each world is well constructed, clearly presenting the theme and including a huge amount of Easter eggs to previous video games of the era, or just to clever puns that relate to the time period being portrayed. The Victorian England level, for example, has plenty of street or shop names that make reference to places such as Whitechapel or notorious characters, real or fictional, such as Jack the Ripper and Sweeney Todd. Some levels are nice and vibrant, the Egyptian level showing this off well, and again, the inclusion of aliens in this level, alluding to them perhaps having built the pyramids, does emit some charm. Unfortunately, there are a number of negatives, and this is really where the game starts to be crushed under its own weight. They mainly come down to a serious lack of polish, and it really does detract from the experience and ruins some of the aforementioned charm at the same time. Examples of this include Clive's body flipping around like a ragdoll upon death, his head flopping through the floor, enemies' bodies landing as stiff as a board when defeated before disappearing, and a complete lack of any sort of death animation on either dying or defeating a boss. Instead, the stage just restarts immediately, or on defeating a boss just goes straight to a load screen. It's these little moments that make or break a game that relies on a charming world, and that's before factoring in things such as the rabbit that you need to catch glitching out and not moving as mentioned earlier. There were occasional frame rate issues too, although this was not a huge issue I must say. It was more a case of that feeling of it being very rough around the edges. In terms of audio, the music is perfectly inoffensive and sometimes suits the stages well. It's by no means bad, but it never feels bombastic or whimsical enough to complement the worlds being shown. Voices are delivered via a gibberish language with on-screen text, again as per the games of the era which inspired it. Visuals have had a lot of thought put into them, with a huge number of jokes and nods included, and they do look quite pleasant to be fair, but the serious lack of polish affects the good work put in here, and unfortunately they score just 9 out of 20. Audio works fairly well, but again just never really stands out, and it doesn't really push the boundaries of making the game world as wacky as it could have been. They get 12 out of 20. Clive N Wrench costs £24.99 and regional equivalents are on your screen now. With 11 worlds and a few secrets to find, and the collectathon aspect of course that will be a huge draw to some, there's probably around 6 to 8 hours of gameplay to complete the game, and perhaps 10 or so in total to 100% it. As always, it of course depends on your skill level. This is quite a decent amount of time for your money, but those performance issues and the general lack of polish and the problems these cause will affect the score here. With this in mind, value gets 11 out of 20. To conclude, Clive N Wrench is a game not without merit, and perhaps it was just too ambitious a project for a single person to take on. Rob Wass can be proud of creating a game that will delight fans of 3D platformers from the late 90s, feeling like a lost relic of the era in some respects, and it helps to keep a genre alive that is not as prevalent as it was during that time. However, this doesn't change the fact that things just feel very rough around the edges, and it will be up to each individual as to how forgiving they are with such issues when playing. A fun game for sure, but perhaps one for a future sale. Clive N Wrench gets a SwitchUp score of 61%. Thank you everybody for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do remember to leave a like if you did. Is this one you'll be picking up, or have you done so already? If so, what did you think of it? Please do let us know in the comment section below. I want to say a big thank you to Dave Morrish over at SaveDecks Gaming, who helped with the writing of some of this review. I've had a bit of a nightmare of a week actually. I got rushed to hospital midway through it, and Dave, who had bought this game himself, played through a big chunk of it for me. Obviously I was not able to at the time, and helped me get this out in time, so thank you very much Dave. You're an absolute superstar. Don't forget, if you are looking for eShop credit to pick this game up, or any other for that matter, you can do so via our website, switchup.gg. If you use the code SwitchUp, you can save yourself 5% off of your order. It helps you save a bit of money, of course, but it also really helps the channel out, which is much appreciated. There's also a link down there to Play Asia if you want to import any games. Won't be necessary for this game, of course, but if you are looking to do so, use the link down there, use the code, and you can get yourself 5% again off of an order from there. A quick thank you to our patrons, as always, for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.
Huh?